Oh, yeah, a lot of them went over there. It's good to see you today. And if you didn't get a handout, there's some on the table in the back where Joe's holding them up, and a piece of paper that you might need, because we have a thing we might use that for. But it's great to be back with you guys. I've been up here, I was counting up, probably about 8 times. I've been up to the northwest and done some of the clusters, and I see Keith over there, worked with Greater Gresham. One time we brought a group up here on a mission trip, and it was when they were building the new building at Greater Gresham. And for some reason, I was a lot heavier, if you can believe it, then. And Joe put me up on the roof, and I think he was checking to see how sturdy the construction was. You know, if Carter doesn't fall through, then it's okay. But I spent a week up on the roof, and it didn't rain one drop. I couldn't believe it. It was beautiful weather the whole week. And so we had a good time, and I guess it's still standing, that building. Good. That's good to know. But, yeah, I'm amazed up here at the resiliency of people. You know, we're sitting in our place we're staying, looking out the window, and I'm going, man, I wish I could go on a walk. It's beautiful, and, you know, I want to see the ocean. And I'm like, man, it's pouring down rain. That's crazy. And then I see a mom pushing a baby buggy, and the baby's all wrapped up, and she's just jogging down the thing in the rain. And I see couples holding hands like they're in love, just walking out in the middle of the rainstorm, you know, and I'm going, what in the world are these people doing, walking around in the rain? And then finally I see this old grandma. I'm not making this up. She's wearing a bathrobe and house shoes. And it's like 40 miles an hour, blowing rain, and she's out walking. And I said to my wife, okay, Michelle, let's go. You know, so we put our rain stuff on, and 2 days in a row we've been out walking in the rain, and I can't believe I got her to do it. But she's like, oh, I think it's beautiful. It's nice. So I can't get her to walk at home when it's sunny. You know, I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, beautiful country up here. Enjoy being back. We're going to spend our time today talking about helping the unchurched become fully developing followers of Christ. We're not really going to talk about small groups as much as we are reaching unchurched and helping them grow to become disciples. We'll talk about small groups in our session tomorrow morning more, so that'll be then. But, you know, I was asking my wife, because of Steve's talk last night, I was convicted. I said, can I tell a blonde joke? Because she's a blonde. And I even tried it out on her, and she didn't get it at first, but, you know, once she got it, she said, yeah, that would be fine. And so there was a blonde that got on the plane to go to Paris, and she did not have a first-class ticket. Well, as soon as the plane took off, she noticed there was one seat in first class. She just got up and went and moved into that seat. The flight attendant came over and said, ma'am, do you have a first-class ticket? She said, no, I don't. I'm going to Paris. I'm not moving. And she didn't want to cause a scene, so she just went back up to the front, started working. Well, the co-pilot opened up the thing and the door and said, what's going on? You see that blonde-haired lady in first class doesn't have a first-class ticket, and she won't move. Let me go talk to her. Ma'am, you cannot sit here if you don't have a first-class ticket. I'm going to Paris. I'm not moving. He didn't want to make a scene either. He went back, sat down by the pilot, and the pilot said, what's going on? He said, there's a blonde-haired lady, won't get out of first class. We don't want to make a big deal out of it. He said, you say she's a blonde? Yeah. Okay. Well, my wife's a blonde. I'll take care of it. So the pilot goes out there, and he just leans over and says, ma'am, you can't sit in first class. And she said, well, I'm not moving. And so he whispers something else in her ear. She gets up and goes and sits in the back as fast as you could believe, back in her coach seat. And they're all amazed. What did you say to her? And he said, I just whispered in her ear, told her first class wasn't going to Paris. And some of y'all get that. But, you know, I think about that joke. And a lot of times our churches, we're not sure what direction we're going. We're not sure how we're going to get there. We don't really have a plan. And when I first came on staff with Steve, almost 18 years ago now, he gave me a book and said, read this book. This will tell you a lot about how we're organized as a church. And it wasn't the Bible, although we go by the Bible. It was a book called the E-Myth. and the entrepreneurial myth, and it was a business book. And so I read that book, and then I started observing how we did things at Lake Pointe, and I was like, I get it. There's a process. There's a system on how we do things. That book was all about a McDonald's franchise can be the same in Portland as it is in Russia, because there's a playbook, there's a plan on what you're going to produce. And so I started looking at our church, and that's how we did things at Lake Pointe. We had a process, and the biggest process was how are we going to get a lost, unchurched person to become a fully developing follower of Christ? How are we going to see that happen, and what's our plan for that to happen? A lot of times in our churches, if it happens by accident, doesn't it? You know, oh, great, we got someone that got saved. Hopefully they're going to grow in Christ and become a mature believer, but there's not really a strategy and a plan. So I'm going to talk today a lot about the strategy involved that we use and things that we've tried. We're not perfect, and we're in a process all the time. We're always changing things, you know, and adapting, and that's part of success as well. I'll give you some statistics to cheer you up this morning, okay? Approximately 350,000 churches in America, 4 out of 5 are on a plateau or declining. 4 out of 5. 80 to 85% of churches in America are on the downside of the growth cycle. Aren't these exciting? 76-75% of all congregations founded before 1960 are either on a plateau in size or shrinking in numbers. Feeling better yet? In the latest study, Hadaway and Marler and Chavs conclude that the church attendance rates for both Protestant and Catholics are half the generally accepted levels, 20% churched, 80% unchurched. So even bigger than we normally hear. I was just looking at Keith Evans on Facebook, and he just put on there yesterday a new stat that Portland is the most unreligious city in America. Boy, that's alarming, isn't it? Most unreligious city in America. You know, when I see stats like this, it can get depressing. But then I remember who we serve. I remember we serve a God that can do incredible things, you know. And yeah, the trends don't look real good for the church right now. But then I look up and I see churches that are doing incredible things. I see churches in the Northwest. I've met some of you guys that are incredible things are happening in your churches. And you are totally bucking the trend. And that's exciting, and there's a reason why that's happening. It's because God's still alive, God's in charge, God wants us to be an exciting church for Him. I remember coming up here and meeting with different groups and hearing about how you know, don't have as many people coming as you would like to some of your churches, and how it's such an unchurched, non-Christian communities that you live in and all that. And to me, I go, that's an opportunity. I mean, you've got more of a ministry field because you have so many unchurched, so many non-religious people. It's not really a negative. It's a look at the field we're in. You know, we even have a greater opportunity to reach people. And that's kind of how I look at these kind of stats. To me, it just makes me charged up. What are we going to do to keep reaching people and seeing them become fully developing followers of Christ? I thought this was good information. This survey, 150 churches, they were asked, what were the major barriers in growing a healthy church? And see if you identify your church with any of these. My clicker's working. First is lack of vision. Lack of vision. Obviously, we just talked about the vision that we have in our churches, in our whole world, in our whole country, and how it's declining. But even up here, you can't have lack of vision because there's so many people to be reached. Almost everyone you meet doesn't go to church. It's not a Christian, probably. So the vision can be huge, as big as you want it to be. Lack of outreach and passion. You know, this is a big one in any church. Do we have a passion for the unchurched, for the lost? I had a pastor up here one day tell me, I said, y'all have a beautiful building. You can seat like 350. And he said, oh, yeah. Back in the 70s or whatever, a lot of people from the South came up here and built some really nice church buildings. And now we're running about 40 on Sunday. And he said the feeling in our church is a lot of people like this to be a protective place to come, away from the lost world. And I thought, well, that's the opposite of how it should be, isn't it? You know, we should be going, this is not for us that are churched. This is for all the ones around us that aren't churched. And we got to figure out how we're going to have a passion to reach those unchurched people. Congregation not willing to change. That's a growth barrier. You know, one thing I love about where I serve is when I first went there 18 years ago, we were in another location, and all the adults were meeting inside the building, and all the children were meeting out in portable buildings. And I said to Steve, Steve, I think we need to move all the kids inside and give them the best space. We'll put all the adults out in these portables for a Bible study. And I said, what do we need to do? Do I need to start praying and fasting and having, on my knees for the next 6 months, praying this up because I need to move all the adult classes? He said, 2 weeks before you need them to move, just send them a letter with a map and tell them what room they're going to be in. I called my wife and I said, don't unpack. We're not going to be here long. And sure enough, that's what I did. I moved every adult class that August and didn't even talk to anybody about it and said, here's your new room. And I got zero, not one complaint. And I went, this is a unique place. And why? Because the congregation was willing to change to do whatever we needed to do. We needed to start a Saturday night service. We had 250 people go. I'll give up my seat and my parking place on Sunday morning, and I'll go to Saturday night, even though I only thought Catholics went on Saturday night. But I'm willing to go do that if that's what y'all need. So that kind of a spirit of change and willingness to do things. Lack of leadership. This is one we hear all the time as a growth barrier. We're not turning out new leaders and producing leaders, and we're not having apprentices and generating new people. We're not holding that up to our people that we need more leaders. Lack of prayer, that's a huge one, isn't it? That's one we can really rally around. Probably easier than a lot of them. Let's start praying. Talking to Dustin last night, and he said he's meeting with a group of 4 pastors weekly basis, praying about what the God would want them to do in their area. Maybe planting a new church someday, starting with prayer. Lack of unity. The first church, it talked about how they were unified, and they had one purpose, and they shared all with one another. No one went in need, and it was unified. We've all seen churches that have been destroyed, haven't we, because of lack of unity. Congregations too comfortable. That's a huge growth barrier. One of the first churches I went to when I was going to be the minister of education, I'll never forget it. It was on Sunday morning, and the pastor said, I want you and your little wife and family, little bitty kids, y'all sit right here on the second pew. And at the right time, I'm going to have you come up on the platform, introduce you, and have you say a word. And we were sitting there, and this giant man comes and stands at the end of the pew, and I looked up at him, and I said, can I help you? He goes, you're in my seat. I said, well, the pastor told me to sit here, and I'm a guest today. And he goes, well, I'll let you stay there today, but don't do it again. I don't know what I was thinking. I should have said, that's a sign from God. Don't go to that church. They all have their assigned seats. They're all real comfortable. All he knew, we were just a visiting family, much less coming to view of a call, But we get too comfortable, don't we, in our churches and our people. We have a saying at our church, nobody owns a seat or a room. I can move small groups every week. And people I moved one small group in our church 6 times in 1 year. And I would show up to their door, and I was really just coming to say hi, and they'd be like, where do you want us to go next week? And then eventually I'd go show up, and they'd go, oh, good, you're going to move us. Every time you move us, we pick up a new couple, because we're like in a new room, and they think we're new. And so they didn't mind it after a while. But we can't let our congregations get so comfortable that they own a room, they own a seat, they have their way of life. This is our cocoon, and I see that happening a lot in churches. Little ownership of mission and purpose. What's the mission? What's the purpose of the church, of your church? Are people owning that? Are they living that? Resistant power structures. That's a big one. And when I've met with some of you guys up here, I've heard that a lot. Well, we've got this power pocket of people that have been here a long time, and they're not really open to that. And we're going to have to wade through that and wade through this. Now we do have to wade through some stuff, but that doesn't mean we don't try some things and do some gradual changes here and there. We're not going to go change everything overnight, or we're not going to be there, right? We will be out. Church unwilling to adapt to a changing culture. And that one is huge. It doesn't mean we're going to change what we do biblically, but we've got to change what we do to reach the culture. And maybe we look up one day and go, okay, they're not coming to our church, so we're taking the church to them. We're going to spend more time outside of the walls of this church than we are in the walls of this church, because that's where the unchurched people are. They're not coming to our church. And we're going to get creative on how we're going to do that, through serving people, through, having activities out in the world, not necessarily at church. They may never come to our church, but we're going to start reaching people. So you might look at those and go, okay, where do we line up as our church? What are we struggling with? We all struggle with some of these. There's not a church in America that doesn't. So we're not alone in this. So how do we get focused? Steve and I, we've done this before, kind of this meeting in Australia one time, and we talked about you need a clear, concise biblical purpose for your church, something that the church can grab a hold of. Now, purpose statements and all those things have been around a while, and people spend a lot of time on catchy phrases and coming up with things and put it on their letterhead and on their website, but it never did anything inside the church. It was just, we got to have one. They say we need one. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a biblical purpose that drives everything you do at your church. Ours has been pretty much the same thing for 30 plus years. We just made it a little bit shorter. That's it. Sharing Christ, building believers. We are there to reach the unchurched. Sharing Christ. We're not going to be comfortable if we're not seeing people reached. But we're also not going to be comfortable if we don't see them growing in the faith and becoming a disciple. And I think that's the Great Commission, isn't it? That's what it's all about. So our church started with 7 families in a bait shop on the shores of a lake 33 years ago? 33 years ago now. Started with 7 families, and our goal was never to become a large church. It was just to become a church that was doing what God called us to do, which was this. And the results have been up to God, because we've just been working this purpose consistently, I think, for those years. And God's brought people to us as our people have reached them. And then we've had a way to help disciple them. So sharing Christ, building believers, whatever your purpose is, you need to go back to it and go, is this what we are really about? Does this drive everything we do at our church? Are there things that have crept into our schedule and things that we do that really don't fulfill any part of this purpose? And we'll do that somewhat, not every year, but we've done it probably at least every other year. We'll ask all of our ministries to evaluate and go, has it gotten out of hand? Is there too much stuff in your schedule and some things don't line up with our purpose? What do we need to eliminate? And we will cut things out of our schedule. And I know, because I've worked with some of your churches, some of your church schedules are heavier than our church schedule. You have more programs and more things on your calendar with a lot smaller group of people. And so you may need to go back and go, what do we need to tweak, to eliminate, that's not really helping us fulfill our purpose? And that's a huge process and a huge step forward if you do that and determine what are the key things that are going to make us purposeful. What do we need to get rid of that's not? And then focus all of your effort on those things. We have an 8-step strategy. We've been doing this for a long time. But basically, you got the curious folks that are out there in the world. They're wondering what church is about. You got the convinced. You got the contagious contributor. Convinced are the people that go, I understand about Christ. I accept Christ. I want to be a part of the body. Contagious contributor, I'm going to go out and reach a lost person. So our goal is to get people into that strategy. Build relationships with the unchurched is the first thing. How are we going to reach an unchurched community? We're going to get our people to start focusing on unchurched friends. Who do you know? Who do you work with? Who's your neighbor? We cannot train enough witnessing a hit team to people to go witness. We could do that. We could get a hit team together and train them on how to share their faith and then let everybody else in the church off the hook. And they're all going, oh, good. We got people that are called to that. Our philosophy is all of us are called to do that. And all of us need to know how to share our faith. It starts with just hanging out with lost people, One first times we had a restaurant, we moved to this new location of our church and we relocated. We didn't have any restaurants around the church until Chili's came in. We wore Chili's out because, that's all we had. Well, I remember going into Chili's one time and Stroop, I'm in there with some guys on staff and Stroop's sitting over at the bar in Chili's by himself. And I'm going, well, what's he doing over there? That's kind of weird. He's sitting over at the bar. And so I went over there to him. I said, hey, man, do you want to come eat with us? We're over here. And he said, some days I don't have very many lunch is free. And sometimes I just like to get a paper and come over here and meet lost people. He said, because I have to work at it to meet a lost person. I'm a pastor of a large church. When do I hang around with lost people? And I thought that was pretty cool, that he's trying to meet lost people. And so we got to get our people that are with the lost people to wake up and go, how am I going to share my faith with them? So share a verbal witness. Steve has done a great job with this because we don't do a seminar necessarily where people go for 12 weeks and hear this about how to share your faith. And, that's okay. Some people are good at that and want that. It's okay. But to open it up to the whole church, you have to mainstream the how to share your faith. And he will do this once or twice a year on Sunday morning in big church. And he'll draw it up on the board. Here's how you share your faith. The bridge illustration, one verse evangelism, and teach everybody how to do it. And then we'll give out the impact card on Sunday morning to everyone. And we'll say, you all have at least three people you're trying to reach for Christ. And now you've been equipped. Now go build a relationship with a lost person and try to get them into a spiritual discussion eventually, But the point I'm making here is there's a strategy to this, and it's releasing the whole congregation, not just a few. And I think we need to get to that. We need to see our Sunday morning sometimes as the prime hour that we're going to equip our people to go and make disciples, not just preaching another sermon. So we hand those out. Then we talk about them all year long. Anytime it's a message about evangelism or a Bible study small group lesson, we refer to your impact list, your impact card. Our people, if you went to church and asked them about an impact card, they could tell you what that meant because we talk about them all the time and challenge people to reach their impact list. And so that's part of the strategy that we do. So invite to Lake Pointe. That's another part of this, reaching the curious. Is your church something that you would want lost people to be invited to? That's something to really think about. Are people that are lost going to come in and they're going to experience exactly what you're afraid they might? Someone's sitting in their seat, you're in my seat. not friendly, or you're using church language all the time. You ever think about what an unchurched person might feel like in a church? And they're like, I don't even understand what they're talking about. I've never heard that before. And sometimes we got to look at how we are with unchurched. Would they even feel comfortable in our church? And so then obviously worship God, participate in a small group. Now they're getting assimilated in the life of the church. And then they become servants. Where am I going to use my spiritual gift? And giving financially to the church as well as with their gift, and then reach and develop others. So we're trying to move people through that process. Strategies for reaching the unchurched. These are just a few things I jotted down that I thought, or how do we reach outside the walls of the church? One is community outreach. For us, one of the ways we do that is once a month, we do gift bags, and we ask our people. I used to have a team of people that we would recruit that would go and deliver a gift to newcomers. And then we said, this is crazy. We don't need a team. We just need to release our people that see people moving in down the street or someone they've never really met, and they want to go welcome them to the neighborhood. And so we put gift bags in the back of the auditorium, and Steve will just announce it and say, this is community outreach week. If you've seen someone move in down the street or you want to give someone a gift from Lake Pointe, take them a gift bag today. For us, it's gourmet hot sauce and Tostita chips, and then some information about the church. And we don't pile all these brochures in there. We usually put one or two things in there that points them to our website, to our internet campus that we have, because sometimes that's the front door. People look at the internet campus and decide if they want to come ever physically to the campus. So community outreach, and it's probably been 8 years ago now, maybe 10, we surveyed our new members, said, how did you first come to Lake Pointe? 20% said, because of that gift bag I had on my front porch. That's why I even ever gave Lake Pointe a try, because I got chips and hot sauce. That's pretty good return. If you know anything about marketing and advertising, that's pretty good return. And it's different for everybody. You may do your thing with homemade cookies or pies or homemade bread or, whatever, but there's got to be some way you're getting your people to go, I know some people that moved in, or I know some new people, or I just hadn't ever met these people, and I want to go meet them, and I need something to give them. But it's a concentrated effort to do that. So getting out there in the community. Capitalize on big days. There's big days in there of the year. Now, I know some churches because I've talked with some churches, and they don't do anything like, for example, on Christmas Eve. They're like, oh, no, we think that's a time for family, and it's too much trouble on Christmas Eve. Folks, if you're not doing a Christmas Eve service, you're missing another Easter. Our Easter is now bigger. Our Christmas Eve is bigger now than our Easter, I think, in attendance. And we'll do we now have a Christmas Eve service on the day before Christmas Eve, because we have people that want to go out of town and they were missing the Christmas Eve. So now we have a Christmas Eve service. And that one is as big as the Christmas Eve prime time slot. It's packed. And so we're getting thousands of people there on Christmas Eve, and a lot of churches go, we're not really going to do a Christmas Eve because our 100 people want to go be with their families. Well, maybe it's time we go, we need our 100 people to reach unchurched people that may only come one time a year on Christmas Eve, so we're going to sacrifice that and do a Christmas Eve to reach out and advertise it. This is a warm environment to come to on Christmas when people are actually thinking about Christ. Well, a lot of them are thinking about Santa Claus, but you know what I mean. They're a little more open to it. Big days. We even added some big days on our calendar. We were like, okay, you got Christmas Eve, you got Easter. Those are big days, obviously. But why don't we add a couple of big days at other parts of the year and behind the scenes call them impact days? And we would just tell our people, so-and-so weekend in about a month is going to be Impact Weekend. If you're ever going to get an unchurched person to come, that's the day to do it. Because the plan of salvation, we're going to present very clearly in the service, even more than normal. And so we wouldn't really do anything huge or special for those days. We would just make sure everything was really excellent and our people were geared up for it. And we're actually reaching some of their people. And we saw not a huge change in our attendance, but we did see a spike in decisions from normal on those days. And a lot of seeds were planted. And it made our people think, okay, if I'm going to bring my lost friend, this is the time to do it. I'm going to work on them and try to get them to come. So big days, mainstream evangelism training, we've already talked about that. How we do it in worship as well as we do it in our small groups and train our people on how to share their faith, trying to make it not scary and a long presentation. Just be natural, be real, build friends for Christ. You know, we think relationship evangelism works better than any other way. Community service, and you know this as well as anybody, but, you know, getting out in the community and doing good things for other people in the name of the Lord, or just, you know, I'll give you an example. We don't have a huge college ministry for the size church we are because we don't have a college campus anywhere near us. But about 3 months ago, our downtown ministry in downtown Dallas, they were going to need a new playground because the other one was just messed up, torn up, dirty. So our college ministry took that on as a project. And our college ministers were like, we really need about 100 people, and we're only running about 25 to 50 college kids. And so he just went on Facebook and said, so-and-so Saturday at this park, we're going to build a playground. And that thing went viral and got up to about 10,000 hits of people looking at that. And he had about 150 to 175 people show up. Half of them didn't even know what Lake Pointe was. And so they were out there serving in this community, building this playground. And our guys were building relationships. And then they followed up with them and invited them to something, a college activity. But sometimes you can go serve in the community and people don't even know you're a church. And up here, it's like that a lot, isn't it? People are out, they're willing to serve, they're willing to do things in the community. They don't have any church affiliation and they're not Christians. They're just doing it because it's good for mankind, you know? So you need to come up with ways you're going to get out and serve the community and make an impact. And sometimes I think up here it's even more that you have to do that almost more than you are in your own church, inside your own building, even in your own office, you know. And I think sometimes we work 40 hours a week for the 50 people that come every week, when we ought to be working about 10 hours a week for them and about 30 hours a week for the people that aren't here yet. You know, how are we going to impact the community? If growth is our biggest barrier up here in reaching unchurched, we got to get out there. And that's going to change the culture of a lot of churches. You know, if you're in a church and they expect the preacher to be there from 8 to 5 every day, and Monday night outreach, and Wednesday night, and Sunday morning, Sunday night, and the preacher's always at the church, well, that's saying they like that being comfortable. We know where the preacher is. He's at the church. And that may be a huge change for your church, going, I'm not going to be at the church. I'm going to be at this activity, and I'm going to be over here at this school thing, and I'm going to be at this, and I'm going to be at that, because that's where the lost people are. It's a different way of looking at it, isn't it? Provide quality children's student ministry. You know, that's a huge thing for reaching unchurched. If we want unchurched people to ever try our church out, we better have great children's ministry. And I mean the best in town. And I mean from the facility to the programs you're doing. If they're paying $500 a week to put their child in a daycare, it's probably a lot more than that. I don't even know now. $1,000 a week, or some huge number. And that child care, state-of-the-art, beautiful, clean facility, and then they show up and put their child in your child care on Sunday morning, and it's the opposite of that, do you think they're going to stick? They're probably not. They're probably going to go, I don't feel real comfortable leaving my child there. So we ought to look at our facilities. Yes. Is it the best children's facility in the city? Is our youth student facility the best there is in the city? It ought to be. And we ought to pour some resources there. And then we got to go out in the community and say, we've got a great thing on Saturday morning for children. You don't even have to come to our church. We're going to do it over at this field. You know, that's where I think Upward is great and those kind of things. And but, you know, I've known some churches, and one in particular in Dallas, they started their whole church based on children's ministry. Started with nobody. Now they run about 2,500. And it was all, we're going to have the best children's ministry in the school that we're renting. And that's how they grew their church, because families started flocking to their school, that school, for church, because it was a great children's ministry on Sunday morning. So I think that's huge on reaching unchurched families. Best in the city, facility and ministry for children and students. Best, be guest friendly. That's a huge thing, you know. And I remember I was up here a few months ago in that snowstorm. Joe about killed me that trip, dragging me through all these blizzards, and I thought I was going to die before I got back to Texas. But I made it. I survived. But I remember talking to some of the churches I was meeting with, and I found that the fellowship time between Bible study and worship was real important to a lot of churches. They would have, you know, you would have the community coffee and donuts, and I remember talking to a few, and I'd say, well, so where do you have that time? Oh, we have it down in the fellowship hall. And I said, so what's happening at the in the auditorium? Well, nobody's in the auditorium. We're all down the hall. I said, what happens if a newcomer walks in and there's absolutely nobody down there? And they were like, yeah, sometimes that is kind of weird. You know, like last week, this lady, single lady, came in and there was nobody there. And I felt bad, so I didn't go down to the coffee. I stayed up here and talked with her until everybody came back up here. We see the problem with that? It's not really being guest friendly. That's being, we like our fellowship time and we're here for that, not for people that might walk through our door. And that's a change that church made immediately. They said, we're going to move our fellowship time into the foyer outside the auditorium, so when someone walks up for the 11 o'clock service, there's a buzz up here. And we're looking for new people coming in, and then we're getting them coffee. I mean, that changed the whole way they did Sunday morning at that church. So being guest friendly. This is a big thing at our church that we have to work on all the time, especially in our small groups. You know, I hear it many different times. Well, I went to 5 different groups and I didn't feel welcome. And that just kills me, you know. And we'll do first impression training a lot for small groups, because the worst thing that happens is when a group's been together, I think 2 or more years, they become ingrown. And they become stagnant, and it gets really hard for a new person to break into a group. And we have to constantly say, it's not about you, it's about the new person that might want to come. So being guest-friendly, having your doors manned, your parking lot, people looking for people driving up, you're greeting them, you're helping them, and that's really going to be a first impression. They may or may not come back based on that. So reaching the unchurched, those are a few things. Provide an excellent Sunday experience. Obviously, we've already talked about that. Steve has always had this saying, I'm speaking for Steve, but because he's brainwashed me over the years. He's always had this saying, if you do 2 things with excellence, you can be a New Testament thriving church. Worship and Bible study, small groups. If you just did 2 things and you did them with excellence, you could be a thriving, growing, disciple-making church. And I really believe that, and I see how he's modeled that. You know, sometimes as pastors, you get so stretched that you're preparing 3 messages a week. And, you know, Steve prepares 1 message a week. He preaches it 3 times. But then he also has another guy that's doing half the year. Now, you think about the quality you could get if you're preparing that many sermons. The quality is through the roof on what you can do in that setting versus 3 sermons a week and I'm the only guy. Now, I know you're going to be the only guy in your church because most churches aren't blessed to have multiple people, but even the only guy, you go from doing 3 sermons a week to doing 1 that's really off the chart because you're pouring your time into that. And you may think, how am I going to do that without losing my head and losing my job? Well, that's what you got to figure out. But it is important to look at that and go, maybe we can transition off of a Sunday night every week. You know, maybe I'm going to do once a month, and the other times we're going to let small groups meet, or we're going to do some other things, you know, because providing excellent Sunday experience starts with you and the message you're going to have ready and the music, you know. If the music is not good, if the quality's not good, the sound's not good, you know, that's going to affect if people want to come back. But even more than that, it's the whole spirit. It's the whole spirit of the church. You remember what happened after 9/11, the Sunday after? What happened? Yeah, it was like Easter, wasn't it? It was like Easter. What happened 2 weeks, 3 weeks after that? It kind of went right back down, didn't it, to the normal level. Well, Barna Research did a survey with those people that went on after 9/11 and said, why did you not stick with church? And they said, because the number one answer was, we did not experience God at church. And so they were looking after that tragedy for God. They went to church, and then they didn't go back because they said, we really didn't experience God at church. And I think that's sad indictment on church, but, you know, it's got to be an excellent experience every week, every Sunday, excellent in every way. Small groups, worship, preaching, being friendly, all those things, or people won't come back. All right, we've got a few more minutes. We talk about 5 W's of a fully developing follower. Every church has their own thing, but the point I'm making here is you need something. You know, this is what we require for people to be a member. My dad was a pastor for years, and he was more in a traditional Southern Baptist kind of church. And he started looking at what we were doing, and he would come and observe. And he said, you know what? Y'all do the best job of holding people accountable for being a member. He said, at our church, you could just walk down the aisle, fill out a paper, you're a member, and that's all we ever know, and hopefully you make it to Bible study. Your church, you have all these requirements and things they have to agree to. Well, you're producing a lot more of a committed person than what we did. And we talk about worshiping God. You know, they got to be there at worship. We'll talk about each one of these a little more in a minute. Live by God's word, walk with God's people, contribute to God's work, and impact God's world. Those are our 5 W's for becoming a member of our church. And you'll see them all on these next slides, so don't worry about it if you didn't get them in there. Corporate worship, worship God. Corporate worship, we think if you're going to be a member, you ought to want to be with the body, you know. And you ought to be having personal worship time. It's kind of interesting now. Corporate worship is changing in some ways with the internet campus. That's weird, but people feel like they are connecting now online, watching our service and chatting to each other. I never thought that would work that well, but it is working. And people really feel this connection, corporate worship, even though they're not there physically, which has been interesting to see. Then you've got live by God's word, live under the authority of God's word, obey God's word, and be accountable to other believers. for how you're living your life. And a lot of that happens through our small groups and through being in a small group. But we think that's part of being a member. You ought to be willing to do that. Then walk with God's people. This is really about being connected in a life group and a small group. Then growth group, and I'll go through all these tomorrow because we're not going to take the time to do that today. But it's not just for us. We're trying to get people from big church down where they know 4 or 5 people that are same gender like their best friends. And so it all happens through our small groups. But you can't join our church if you're not willing to join a small group. You can't become a member. Why would we be like that? Because we know people are going to fall through the cracks. We're not going to be able to minister to them and take care of their needs. And so they have to join a small group if they want to join our church. And I think that's important. That gets them assimilated in the life of the church. Contribute to God's work, serving, using their natural abilities, their spiritual gifts, and they're sharing the load with other people. You know, it's not just, it's a cooperation. And so that's part of becoming a member. And then it's giving. Contributing to God's work is serving, and it's also giving. And we talk about those 3 ways that people can give. Systematic, what's your plan for giving? Proportional, how much are you going to give? How much has God blessed you? How much are you going to turn around and give? If He hasn't blessed you a lot, then you don't have to give a lot. Sacrificial, every once in a while we'll do new things, or people want to be stretched to give more over and above the tithe or 10%, keep inching that up and change some lifestyles to do that. So giving, and then the last W is impacting God's world and calling people to be a missionary. Participate in missions and go and be a missionary. And then it's also this whole thing of impact, reaching out to the lost and unchurched friends. So we go through all those 5 things in depth in our new member workshop. And for us, we do it once a month at our main campus. Our smaller campuses, we do it about once a quarter. But about once a month, we'll do a new member workshop, and we require it to be a member. You have to attend the workshop. You can go down and go to our connection center that we have where people can go and make decisions, and you can fill out the paperwork and make a decision and all that. At that point, we don't consider you a member until you go through the workshop. Why? Because we want them to know what it's about to be on the team. What's it mean to be a member here? When you do that kind of assimilation practice, you're going to get a better member in the long run. Now, you may say, well, we could never do that. Our church would get rid of me if I said you have to go through to this. Well, then make it an option first. Start off, if you can't get there, but it's a mandatory thing, say we're going to strongly encourage you to come to this as a new member so that you can know what it's about and you can transition into those things. We like to say it's a one-stop shop. Some churches will go, we're going to do a 4-week membership class. What happens by the 4th week? You got half the crowd there that you started with, And so we're going to put all of our eggs into one. You show up on Sunday night, and it's going to be 3 hours, and then we're done with you. You're a member. And you're going to get it all in that time frame. Cover the 5 W's. The first 2 hours, the 5 W's are covered in depth. What's it mean to be a member? The 3rd hour, we provide a really good meal, and we pair them up with a new member with someone who is of the same age and demographic. Some church member that's excited about Lake Pointe to be there. This is a no-duh kind of thing, but about a year and a half ago, we went, well, if we want a 20-something couple to end up in a 20-something small group, why won't we let's let them eat that dinner with that couple? And all of a sudden, our jump to a small group attendance from the workshop went up about 25%. That's one of those no duh, but it took us a while to get there. So now we have people their own age and life stage and demographic eating with new members of the same age and life stage, and they're building a connection right there at the workshop. Then the call for commitment, the personal action plan. This is in your handout, this personal action plan, and this is a valuable tool. So while they're eating with them at the meal, they're going to help the new member fill that in. What am I going to do in my first year of membership? How am I going to implement those 5 W's in my life? And this is normally a duplicate page or triplicate, and so copies of this, you can see on there where it says contribute to God's work. Where would I like to serve? First choice, second choice. Maybe they're already serving somewhere. They're going to put that down. You know what happens to that on Monday? If they put, I'd like to talk to someone about working in the preschool, our preschool coordinator is getting a copy of that, and we're like, within 5 days, you need to be a hold of these people and tell them here's the next step of the process of getting plugged in. We don't really practice the whole thing of going around the bases where it takes you all these, months and even a year before you're around the home base where you can start serving and all that. Our thing is let's get them serving as quick as possible. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to fill out the thing and the next week they're going to start rocking babies in our nursery. That means they're going to start the process of becoming equipped to do that. And we're going to be screening them in the process, doing background checks, having orientation, letting them teach while some seasoned teachers watching them, and then finally letting them teach on their own. And so it just means we're starting the process of them serving as quick as we can because we want them to. Some jobs they can start the next week. They say, well, I'd serve as an usher. Okay, meet over here. They're going to give you a plate and tell you how to pass it down this. And that's a scary thing because most of them mess up. You ever watched them? And then you got 2 coming down the aisle at the same time, and people are looking around, or people are on the aisle and nobody's there, and they're just like, "What do I do with this plate?" It's tricky. But the personal action plan is a valuable tool, and you get that at the workshop, and you help people know, here's what I'm going to do this first year membership. Then this assimilation system that's in your handout as well. This just gives you an idea of how we follow up when people want information, where they fill out the guest thing and the worship guide saying, I am wanting to be contacted, or I want information about the church. And you can kind of see that chart. I'm not going to go through it. Then we do another thing, because a lot of times churches will do things to build disciples, but then they don't really know how they're building a disciple. And so we're going to try to track how we do each year, and we'll do an annual survey with all the adults in worship. And we'll do it about 3 weeks in a row, because nobody's there. You have a different crowd, every other week. And so we're trying to catch all of our members. We normally do it in January or February because those are our big worship months. This year we got delayed because of some other things, and we're probably not going to get as many in because we did it later in the year. But, we did it. We do it every year. We get the information in through the bulletin or online, and then we put the data in the system. Now, what we're asking is, this is real important right here. First, we're saying, are you a guest? Are you a member? Are you a regular attender? There's a difference between a guest and a regular attender. Most churches don't track that regular attender. That's the person that says, Lake Pointe's my church. I've never joined the church, and I've never been to Bible study. But if you ask me what church I go to, I'm going to say Lake Pointe. We want them to say, I'm a regular attender, and we code them in our computer. They are a regular attender. Then what do we do all year long? We go after them for membership. We go after them to get them in a Bible study group. We have them in a list. We do a mail out just to them. We're targeting them. We do a thing called Pastor's Reception where Steve will host them after a service and talk about what it means to be a member. And just all these things we target regular attenders. We get all the information. We're asking, we want to know if they're at worship, so that's how we find that out. I'm attending worship. Bible study we can track already because we track them every week that we know they're in Bible study. We track if they're serving because we can code them. If they say, I want to be an usher, we're going to code them in the computer that they're an usher, and then we're going to ask the usher captain about twice a year, here's a list of people that say they're ushers. Are these people still serving in your hour? Yes, no, okay. So we know that. We can track their giving, obviously. We don't really do anything with that number except if they want to teach a life group, we're going to find out if they're really supporting the church because we're not going to let them become a pastor of one of our small churches if they're not even giving financially to our church. Then we can track, or we also can send a letter out to folks and say, you know, do you realize that there's people in our church that didn't give anything to the church last year? And they're like, oh, okay. Well, they don't realize they're the ones that are getting the letter. The people that gave something to the church didn't get that letter. But they're just like, okay, well, I guess we all ought to be giving to the church. So that's what we do with the giving one. We can also come up with stats on that about, you know, how many few people that actually do tithe in your church. Then the last one is impacting your world. And we can't really track, we can track part of that because we know if people went on mission. And every year we know who's served on a mission trip or local, national, or international project. But we don't really track the impacting your world, sharing your faith, because we can't track that. That's up to the individual and the Holy Spirit, and are they following through? But we can see with our baptisms how we're doing. So we'll get all that information, we put it into our system, and then we have contact teams who will get a list of people, and it's usually based on did they attend worship or do they have any Bible study attendance. That's who we will call. And that call is basically saying, hey, we're from Lake Pointe. We're just wanting to touch base with you. We know you're a member here and just wanted to see if there's anything we can do for you as a church. And are you still able to attend Bible study? We already know they have no attendance, but we're asking them that to open the door. And sometimes they're like, well, you know I'm out of the habit, or I just quit coming. I plan to come back, or I didn't fill out that thing. I wasn't there in January when y'all did that, but I still come to worship. You know, and we find about 10% of those calls we make are actual people that say, I'm no longer able to come to Lake Pointe. I don't want to be a member there or whatever. And so then we will make them regular attenders again, or we'll make them non-members if they're gone to another church. But it helps us stay leaner and meaner, you know, and helps us be a church we're reaching, trying to help those people that have fallen by the wayside for whatever reason. We're not there being mean or dogging them or being legalistic. We're just saying, we're here for you. Is there a way we can help you answer a question? Do you need help finding a new group? Those kind of things. So that's what it means, I think, of taking a lost person and moving them through the process all the way down where you're actually working on, are they doing the 5 W's? And are you really becoming a fully developing follower of Christ? Now, every one of them could check every box and do everything we ask them to do and still not be a fully developing follower. They can be coming to worship and small group and giving and serving and all those things and at the same time be having an affair. I mean, we know that. We live in that kind of world, don't we? But at least you're working on something. You know, there's a process, there's a plan. Here's what a disciple should look like, even though we know some of you are pulling the wool over our eyes. So that's our system process for assimilation. And this is probably our biggest assimilation tool of our church is our small groups. And that's where we want to get people plugged in. Big church, small church, what we call a life group. Out of the life group, we want people to get in what we call a growth group. And then out of the growth group, men with men, ladies with ladies, holding each other accountable, encouraging each other for how they're living. That's our goal as a church, from worship to those 5 best friends, men with men, ladies with ladies. It all happens through one organization. And that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow morning, how that works, how that flows together, and how it really can simplify the whole purpose and program of your church if you do worship and life group like this together. So, appreciate, let's see how much, I'm pretty much out of time, so I won't show that clip. Yeah. Is that when the break is? Oh, okay, good. Let's take a few minutes. We're going to do some Q&A tonight as well, but we're going to also do a little bit of Q&A after each session. And Steve's here and can also answer these questions. Anything, I know this is like a drinking out of a fire hydrant. You're like hearing all this stuff. Any questions you might have from what we've talked about so far? Is yours on?
Test.
What was the question again?
Difference between a life group and a growth group.
What do you mean by life group and then growth group? Looks like some smaller. Yeah. Life group for us, we will do them anytime, anywhere, but most of ours are built around the worship hours, like Sunday school, because we think that's the best way to assimilate people. Getting them, their children are in ministry and walk across the hall from worship to a small group is a lot better, quicker assimilation. But we don't think you can do on Sunday morning what you can get done in a home, in a casual atmosphere, so we like to do both. So a life group might meet on campus, and then they're going to have a number of growth groups, one couple with 4 couples, one single adult with 5 single adults, that meet whenever they want during the week in a restaurant, in a home. They meet probably twice a month at the most, and then the life group meets every week. So it's just another step of connection.
Yeah, life groups meet on campus for the most part, before or after the service, made up about 25, 30 folks. Your growth group are people who attend the same life group who've made a commitment to meet at least once a month for either fellowship or service. And so, for example, if I'm in a life group, I would go and I would say, hey, I want to be in a growth group too. And it's kind of like a supper club. They'd pull my name out of a hat and put me with 3 or 4 other couples. And then we could stay together, and then we would decide when we meet, we provide our own child care, and we meet at our convenience.
Good question. What else? Yes.
Yeah, we don't set it on an age. We set it on comprehension. So we would do counseling to make sure they understood the gospel. But if someone is old enough to become a Christian, they can be a member. Now, only people that we ask to go through the new members workshop would be 18 and above. The others become members by virtue of the fact that their parents are members.
So how about this covenant? They don't have a covenant?
They do not have a covenant if they're not outside of their covering of their parents, if they're not living out on their own. It's the covenant the parent makes for the family.
They do a young Christians class for children that kind of puts them through a orientation and teaches them about Lord's Supper and baptism. And then we do one for students as well. But it's not the same as this, but a lot of it's the same talk kind of stuff.
Do you introduce the new member workshop people to the whole crowd or their worship service anytime?
No. You know, part of the thing is that, you know, we all come out of this Baptist background where we have everybody walk to the front of the church in order to join the church, and then we have the church vote on them, whether or not they're going to be members or not. I mean, what are they voting on? They're looking at the person, well, they look pretty good to me, I'll vote for them. You know, what are you voting on? So what we've done as a church instead is we've said this is the standards for church membership. And what we've already done is we've voted for every person that comes after this. If they meet the standards, then they're a member. So it's actually a more intelligent vote because we've actually made it mean something. But no, we don't run them back down. And we've stopped having the come down invitation because we don't see it in the Bible. Somebody said, well, what about the scripture says, if you confess me before men, I'll confess you before my Father who is in heaven? That's called baptism. And when we ask a shy person to walk down in front of a bunch of strangers and make a very personal and detailed decision that has to be finished while we're singing the last verse of Just As I Am, over the organ playing, we've de-emphasized the decision. So what we have is a connection center that's in the main foyer on Main Street that's easy to get to. And we say after every service, if you need to join today, if you need to receive Christ today, if you have a question about today's message, if you need to be baptized because you've already accepted Christ, go to the Connection Center. And then we take as much time as we need to carefully counsel them. And then we don't present them in front of the church for a vote because the church has already voted about the standards of membership. And we make sure those standards. And what we found is when we started doing the Connection Center out the back door where people walk instead of at the front, and that made it hard for introverts, is we saw baptisms go through the roof. We saw church membership go through the roof. By the way, we also say to people, if you want to find a small group, you can go to the Connection Center. If you want to find a place to serve, you can go to the Connection Center. It's a one-stop. And so you don't have these 14 different booths they have to go to. If you're ready to take the next step in assimilation or next step in spiritual formation, there's one place you can go. And that piece of real estate is very important. Don't make it around the corner and up the stairs and down in the education building. Put it on Main Street, even if you have to remodel your church. Put glass walls on it so there's quietness inside there, but also so visitors every week can see in there and see that it takes away the mystery from it, that, you know, we don't have anybody in a headlock or anything like that or a belt line going on in the connection room.
Someone had, yeah.
Yeah, we have, in our situation, we have a full-time staff member that does that follows up on all those decisions. And we found that there's a niche there. There's a group of people that we're reaching who, for whatever reason, can't go to church or who want to sample it in the safety of their home first before they come to campus. Obviously, our goal would be to get them on campus eventually, but it allows people to put their toe in the water. But it's not like putting your church on television where there's no interaction, no contact.
Well, it's a lot more cost-effective, and people can be on anywhere. They don't have to be in a cable network or channel either. We got people from China every week, Europe, all over America that are logging in. The interesting thing is now we're looking at how do we connect these people, and the way we're going to look at doing that is we have a pocket of folks, say, in San Antonio that are watching us online, and we have a couple down there that's real excited about getting with the other people in San Antonio that are logging on. And they're going to start a small group down there. Then we're also going to do some small groups that are all online. So be the whole video interactive screen with about 10 faces on a monitor, and you're going through a lesson and talking online. So there's some weird new things that way people are connecting. But boy, when you read the chat on there and the things they're sharing, it's like being in a group, even during worship. They're talking about personal things, and, you know, I didn't get what Steve said. Can someone clarify? Or, man, that really helped me because this is what I'm going through. And, I mean, that's going on through the sermon. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. Other questions? We've got about 3 minutes here on assimilation. Guys, I hope you caught what Carter's saying is we have set a standard for membership. If you're not willing to sign a piece of paper saying, I'll do 5 things, you can't join our church. You have to agree to be in a life group or a small group on campus. You have to agree to give something to the church. We don't require tithing, but we require some giving. We ask them to go to the next level in their giving, from nothing to something, from something to proportional, or from proportional to sacrificial. Third thing is you got to agree to serve somewhere. You got to agree to have an impact card as long as you're a member of our church. 3 people you know that are lost that you're praying for, seeking to witness to, and seeking to invite to the church. And number 5 is to be a self-feeder. And by self-feeders, you make a commitment to have a daily devotional. And we say shoot for 7 days a week. If you hit 5, we consider it a success. All right? If you're not willing to do those 5 things, you can't join a church. And guys, we have the same people joining church as having joined your church, from lost people to Southern Baptist, hardcore. We've been doing this for 25 years. And 25 years, we've had 2 people say, I'm not going to join if I have to do those 5 things. And so we're just raising the bar up, and people are stepping up to it.
Yeah, and one of those 2, if I remember right, because he used to require them to work in the preschool.
It used to be 6 things.
Yeah, you had to work in the preschool the first 4 times in your first year of membership. And he had one person that said, I'm not going to do that.
Well, here's what he said. He said, I've been a Southern Baptist all my life. Nobody's ever asked anything of me, and I'm not about to start now. That's what he said. That was the direct quote.
And we handed him a map to a church down the street. Here's a map.
Ask nothing of him. Expect nothing of him, and they're going to get it. One more question. Okay, can I address that? Here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, the larger one we're having because of this. If you have only home groups, do you have only home groups in your situation? Okay. That may be what. Okay. Yeah. Here's the thing, is that they're getting plenty of study when they come to the sermon. You don't really need another study group. But I would suggest to you, if you could turn those groups that you're having on campus into relational groups, it would be good. And here's why. For them to go to your home group, they have to give you a second time slot in the week. So you've just decreased the number of people who are going to go to that home group. Okay? If you have it before or after your service, even though they may be on campus for 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes, they're going to count it as one time slot. Number 2, it's easier to get someone to go to a group on campus because all they have to do is walk across the hall and check it out. If they don't like it, they can pretend to go to the restroom and not come back. They can't do that in your home groups unless they're willing to crawl out of somebody's bathroom window, okay? Number 3 is you got child care problems, whereas when we do it on site, we don't have child care problems. So we've made it easy for someone because of time, because they don't have to get a map and drive to a strange house and get stuck for 2 hours, and because of child care. Once we get them into the on-site group, all of our home groups flow out of the on-site group, and people will give you the second time slot. They will go into a strange home because they already know the people. They're already familiar. They're connected with relationships. So we're using one to capture them, and then we're using the other to get them into more of an intimate. If you're in a group of 25 or 30, it's great because you don't have to have as many great teachers. And so we're going to emphasize content on our on-site group. In the home, you don't even have to have somebody who can teach because it can all be fellowship. It can be relational. It can be a prayer group. They can go out and do a mission project together. They can read a book and just somebody facilitate it. But when you have all home groups, it puts a real pressure on getting enough leaders who can teach good doctrine. So we're going to teach on the on-site group, and we're going to relate on the home group. And it's easier to get them to come to that second one once I've lowered the bar to make it easy to go to the first one. Does that answer your question? Good.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, guys. We appreciate that.